sure to tune in to At Home with Christ Ministry with Julie Thomas, broadcasting Monday nights at 8 p.m. live on licmc.net, radio, Facebook, and YouTube.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the At Home with Christ Ministries. We're going to begin today by thanking our supporters, our people who listen and watch our podcast shows and stuff. We'd like to thank you. And our today's topic is the problem with the sympathetic listener. You got it? The problem with the sympathetic listener. Because up to this point, we have been talking about the sympathetic listener. You have been on a sympathetic listener's TV show. The problem is, what kind of sympathetic listener have you been dealing with? So to begin with, there is two problems with the sympathetic listener who you select to solve your problems, who you think will solve your problems. And they are as follows. The sympathetic listener is someone who you ask to solve your problems, but you don't know who they are. And 9 times out of 10, you are asking the wrong person to solve your problems. Because it may not be God, but it may be someone else who is more of a child of Satan. So what we're saying is the sympathetic listener that you think who is going to help you solve your problem may not be a child of God. They may be a child of Satan. And number 2, the sympathetic listener could be Satan himself. Remember that when you have a problem, think about who you are going to talk to about solving it. Satan, for example, as we know, will use lies because he is the father of lies. He will tell you what you want to hear, even though those lies that he is spinning in your ear is wrong. And these are one of his tools that he'll use. That is his most defensive tool that he has, which is lies. So when you think about the sympathetic listener, you have to think, who am I talking to? Am I talking to a child of God who's going to pray for me and who's going to ask God to help me? Or am I talking to a child of Satan who is going to mock me and who's going to make my problems worse or bigger? One of Satan's biggest tools, as we are saying, which is one of his weapons, is when he uses lies to get to people who are suffering. So what we're saying, people, is one of Satan's tools is to get to you when you are suffering, when you are down and out, you are hurting. Satan is most active when you are less vulnerable. Meaning that this is Isaiah may have been trying to solve his problems. And instead of listening, he endured the same kind of problem. So we're asking you, are your hands filled with blood? Because just like with Isaiah, you may ask the wrong sympathetic person to listen to your problems, to give you some advice. And that person may have already have blood on their hands. That person may be a child of the devil, not a child of Satan's, because Satan has blood on his hands. So we're asking you, do you have blood on your hands? Now, one example is a man needing a job. The man, according to God's word, said the man should work hard to look for a job. first, and then God will help him. So when you say, God, in prayer, I need something, God is going to first of all think, is what you need in his will, like we've been saying, is what you need in line with he wants. And then you're going to have to do some work too, not just to depend on God to solve the problem. But sometimes you turn to the wrong person, and instead of you listening to God, you will go to the sympathetic listener who, at that particular point in time, will be the devil, and the devil will instruct you to do something that is what people wrong. Now, do you see the difference how the two sympathetic listeners work? One of them is God, who will determine if what you are asking for and what you need help for is in his will, is it in your best interest, and is in his alignment, or is the sympathetic listener the devil and he has blood on his hands and he wants you to have blood on your hands? Now, when excuse me, when you you start lying and the other will use, excuse me, one will start using lies and distort stuff, and that person is Satan, we know for sure. And the other sympathetic listener will use discernment, love, and that person is God. So observe God's word and see what happens. Follow God and see what happens in your life. And don't follow the other sympathetic listener, because you would have to ask yourself, do you want blood on your hands? When you come into agreement with what God has for you in your life, your worries and other things will not matter much, because he will give you the tools to make what you want to happen happen, if it's in his will, if it is in line with him. So let me repeat that. When you come into agreement with what God has for you, your worries will tend to disappear, people. So next we want to say, God will also tell you that the person that you have a disagreement with must be forgiven. But Satan will tell you that the person that you have agreement with or you've been fighting with can't be forgiven. And forgiveness is the problem, because when you are unforgiven and you don't forgive, then how can you expect anything else? And these are all lies, because unforgiveness is based off of a lie. Look at Job in 1:16. It states that he greatly misunderstands God's breath of mercy and forgiveness. What do you think that passage is saying? That he greatly misunderstands God's breath of mercy and forgiveness. That person could be the person with blood on his hand. That person is the sympathetic listener. That person is the devil, because he's not unsympathetic. He's not sympathetic. He's unsympathetic. And then in John 8:44, it tells us that lying is Satan's craft. You get it? Lying is Satan's craft. So when you lie, you're using one of Satan's tools. Now, we're not all perfect, but we have to remember that lying is one of Satan's tools. And sometimes we say, oh, I'm going to lie. But guess what? What's always done in the dark will always come to the light. So if you're lying about something, it's always going to come to the light. And you got to remember that. But also remember this, Paul warns us that lying is the devil's armor. And we must be watchful and we get not caught up in his traps. So do you understand what Paul is saying? Paul warns us that lying is the devil's armor, and we must not be caught up in his traps. We must be watchful because Satan will try to use every lie that he can have to spin it at us and throw it at us. But just as God is merciful, remember that what God said to Isaiah, he said, I'm not listening to you. Your hands are filled with what, people? He said, I'm not listening to you because your hands are filled with blood. So when your hands are filled with blood, sometimes God won't listen to you. And he won't listen to you because your hands are filled with blood. You've been lying. You have been listening and talking to the unsympathetic listener. And we want to say before we end the show, stop listening to someone else who is unsympathetic and listen to God, because the unsympathetic listener is the devil, but the sympathetic listener is God. So don't get distorted and thinking that the person you're listening to is really going to help you solve your problems, because brothers and sisters, they're not. And until next time, we'll see you again.